It's pretty disgusting to me. Elon Musk bros, crypto bros, fuck that shit. Not into it. I mean, objectively, it's interesting as a tech. The community kind of I find repulsive. If your job is to take the code from Stack Overflow and put it into GitHub, worry about it.
Okay, Dave, let's roll. Thank you for making this happen. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate last week that you proactively reached out, not like Kelvin, who just disappears for months.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, the mercurial, we call that. That's how you refer to those people.
Yeah.
I don't know why,
I,
but yeah.
I honestly take big care about my relationship that matter to me. Like I want to put myself like up front and be honest and dependable. So when people do similar gesture, I really appreciate.
Good.
Okay,
Happy
so
to yeah, happy to be a basic human.
yeah,
No. Mhm.
we left last time. We talked about a lot of topics, and I think the last one was about business and surviving turmoils of economy. With that comes, and with work that we done comes stress. So, what are the ways you deal with stress, and where it is right now in your life versus maybe a couple years ago growing up in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest I mean, I definitely have been a ball of stress for a long time, and I am a entrepreneur, and there's a lot of things that can keep you up at night. And I think that a couple things I'm trying to get better at to manage stress is I think that like for me anyway, I think like success requires a kind of level of fitness that I've let go in my kind of middle age that I'm trying to get back a little bit. So I'm trying to kind of get into routine, and I'm not trying to be the most buff dude with an 18 pack or anything like that, but I'm trying to have just good habits around, doing some yoga and, do some cardio and, getting to a little bit more, activity, because I could just sit in the chair at my computer all day long on Zoom calls, and that helps. So that's helping. I'm kind of early in that journey. The other thing I'm trying to do more is just meditation, mindfulness, and try to take a little bit of time and be proactive about managing stress. I feel in general though less stressed though than I was 5 years ago because I feel more prepared. Like I like 5 years ago when a client would ask me to do something, I would be cramming up until the last minute trying to prepare for it, and some of that's just the anxiety of your own feeling of readiness versus objectively are you ready. And it and but now I feel pretty much I do definitely prepare for meetings and stuff like that, but I have more of a routine for that. And I kind of use this thing called test driven meetings. Essentially, when I go into a meeting, I kind of write down the outcomes that I would like to see coming out of the meeting. Not so much this one that we're having right now, because it's just kind of two friends chatting. But like when I'm in a business context or client context, and that helps. So a little preparation, but like a little bit more compact. The other thing I'm doing these days is speedy meetings, so 25 minutes or 50 minutes, not 30 minutes or an hour. So I have time in between to catch up, and blocking time out in my calendar. And then really breaking off at the end of the day, and I don't work past 7. I get up at 7, do my little workout routine, get ready. I'm pretty much ready to go by 8:30, and I'll work from 8:30 to usually 6, but if I need to, I'll go to 7. And that's just kind of, on the weekends, I'll try not to work, just chill by the pool. The other thing too is I think like readjusting my relationship to things like alcohol has helped a lot. Like, so rather than have 2 or 3 cocktails at the end of every night, I will have, 2 or 3 drinks on the weekends, and I just don't drink during the week. And that has been really helpful to just my general energy level and stuff like that. I've also started doing other stuff other than just working all the time. Like I got a little music production controller and make little beats and little music things that for me, I'm not trying to be a DJ, Dave Laribee or anything like that. I'm just trying to um do something that kind of shuts my day off at the end. So really I mean, it's for me, it's kind of readjusting away from workaholism and then finding sustainable pace in that. Although I love my work and it's a big part of my identity. So I'm not trying to, totally um remove that. But yeah, you know, having a safety net is a big deal too, and I think that, one thing is not just for like lean times, that's a big of course that's important, right? To have some reserves, right? Capital, right? Money. And but I think also just to be able to say no. And there's clients at this stage in the game that I don't want to work for. I just either it's an ethical consideration, we'll leave it at that, or it's I just don't believe I could be successful there, and I just don't want to take your money. I don't want dumb money. I want to work for people where we can really make a difference and impact, and that's not just everyone. So being able to say no as well is kind of, I think, correlates to your stress level as well. How about you? Like, how do you manage your stress? Or do you just bottle it up until a little diamond inside of your soul?
I used to not. So I think early stages of consulting, I used to be excited about work and I used to not accumulate stress. And I was even kind of sharing that, people would take vacations to reset. And I'd say, I don't need vacation because I don't accumulate stress. So that was, I'd say, first 2 to 3 years. And after that, once you grow in your role and you become more and more, I guess, important in a way, you start to get more and more, the bar goes higher and higher for you. And that's how I define stress is unmet expectations. So if expectations are high, then there is a big chance you're not going to meet them, and that's what stresses you out. If the bar is low, for example, you go on a vacation, you're like, we're just going to do whatever. Bar is low. So, okay, there's no stress. But if you have like every day scheduled, then you start stressing, oh, we have a bus, we have a train to catch up, and so forth. So then I start to accumulate stress and I just straight up start to have a problem with sleep. So what I've learned is staying more or less active in gym helps because it kind of kicks you out of that tunnel thinking. There's tunnel vision, there's tunnel thinking. And some people have to do it before work because just schedule, right? With consulting, you don't really have evenings per se. So you would try to jam at like 7 in the morning. I would struggle with that. I always had trouble to kind of tune in and be in the gym zone at 7 a.m. It just doesn't work. For me, the best time is between 11 a.m. and maybe like 4 p.m. for gym. And obviously with work is hard, but I'd say at Disney, I was able to do it at lunchtime. So I just go downstairs and kick it for an hour and come back and just finish the day. So gym would help. But what you mentioned, finish work like by 7, I think that's a big deal because blue light, thinking about work or whatever you've been working on, maybe personal project, and you go to bed, just keep on thinking and reanalyzing what you could have done better or how to solve some problem. So having that boundary, I think, is important. I've tried meditation many times. I've tried yoga nidra for sleep. I've tried just generic meditation. I struggle big time. Like when thoughts comes in, I notice them. I try to go bring attention back to not having thoughts, but they just keep coming back. Obviously, practice makes better, but I just hard for me to stick with practice. I'd say I can stick with it for like 2 weeks, and then like, man, it just seems like such a waste of time. And like I look at brain as almost like CPU, and you kind of want to load it at 100% or more, clock it, overclock it, and let it produce results in your life. Yeah. So I think it's good and bad. Like you overachiever, but at the same time you overstressor. So yeah, yoga nidra seems to help for sleep. I noticed doesn't matter who you listen to. all authors seems to have same pattern, is basically sensitivity of your body, your senses, breathe in, focus on breathing, and some sort of visual representation of energy of some sort. So that worked for me pretty well. I would say 60-70% of the time, I either sleep better or fall asleep faster. So I would, for example, my way would be either you put earpieces in your ears, but that they can fall off. They start beeping when they're out of power and such. They wake you up. What would be better? You just put your iPhone on your chest. You set it on speaker, and whenever meditation is over, you're probably ready to sleep. I mean, the downside, it can fall from bed and crack or something. But that was, I think, one of the most impactful. And as far as supplements, I use pill called Deep Sleep, available on Amazon. The best deal is to get it like 120 pills in a big pack, and that's like $40. So what it is, it's a combination of different herbs, like
Okay.
valeriana roots, passion flower, whatever, California something, whatever leaves. And what that helps me, even if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can fall back asleep. If I, and sleep tend to be deeper rather than surface level. If I don't take it, I might have trouble to fall asleep, stay asleep, and go back to sleep if I wake up. As far as like drinking before, I'm not talking water, I'm not talking alcohol. Oh, we can also talk about that, but some people wake up to use restroom or what have you. I noticed for me, it's less of a drinking problem. It's more of a behavioral problem. Like if you tend to have that happen for like a week or two, you tend to wake up for no reason just because you get used to it. So I think if you have habit of such nature of like drinking water at night or use restroom, just stop the urge for like a week consistently. Usually it would go away. So you would learn it's not biological need. It's just your mind get used to wake up for certain hours. On top of that, to be completely honest, about a week or 2 weeks ago, I got diagnosed with minor form of depression, and one of the symptoms is waking up steadily the same time in the middle of the night, and you may or may not be able to fall back asleep. So I didn't know that, but it's one of the key symptoms of depression, waking up at night. So that's kind of where I'm with my stress management. So basically activity, some supplements, and just trying to be, I guess, mindful, that trendy word, mindful about your focus.
Yeah. I like, the guided meditation stuff. Like, I mean, I've done I can capable of meditating on my own. But I really like there's a bunch of apps and stuff like that. I'm sure you're aware of that. And look at this. I'll put one in the chat here. This is one that Alex likes. My partner Alex. She uses this Luminate thing, and it uses the strobe light on the phone to you close your eyes, but it creates like this. It's really cool, and it feels very. Have you ever tried hypnosis?
Like hypnosis?
Hypnotherapy?
No.
Just try it. It's
Okay.
it made me feel like hypnotherapy, which I tried a long time ago to quit smoking, which it worked for me for not permanently, but for like almost a year I quit. And but anyway, I went to this hypnosis session, and I left feeling more relaxed than I've ever felt in my life. I just felt like completely relaxed, like even more than ever like a massage or anything like that. I just felt completely. I was like, that's amazing. Like that, just mental, suggestion thing.
Have you done
Um,
this how you call it, silence chamber or something like that?
oh, the sensory deprivation. I haven't tried that yet. I would like
I've
to.
done that a couple times.
Yeah.
It's basically you submerge in some like soapy, not soapy, but like salty water. It's kind of borderline warm. It's a bit chilly, but not to the point where you cannot be there. And you inside of this chamber, they close the lid, so you in complete darkness, almost complete silence, and this kind of coldish water around you. You're basically floating, and you're there for about 45 minutes to an hour. Man, it's tough, and it's weird and a bit claustrophobic.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, you kind of have to battle through. As far as effects on me, personal experience, not a whole lot, I would say. Like, yeah, sure, it kind of forces you to be in control of your thoughts, because otherwise they can go, spiral out of control. Like, oh my God, claustrophobic thoughts, or like some uncomfortable feelings. So maybe it does help you a little bit, but I haven't done a whole lot of it. Maybe about 5 sessions. Something to try, maybe.
Yeah, I'd love to try it.
Another app my girlfriend used before was called Luna. And Luna, have you heard about it?
I have, yeah.
Okay. So for those maybe who haven't heard, is basically a cartoon images where the voice guides you to color code something and find something on an image. Like it's hidden somewhere, and it's all kind of black and white. You just see contours of objects, but then you have to find and color code them. There is kind of like relaxing background music going on. So idea is that you kind of pass out after about 10, 15, 20 minutes just because it's so sleepy.
Okay. Yeah.
It didn't work for me. I just so focused on finding that damn thing that I just want to outcompete the machine.
I think more than anything, I got a little French bulldog, and he gets up and he crams into me like in the bed. He wedges himself into me, and he's hot. And I don't know if you know French bulldogs, but they are loud. They snore,
Uh-huh.
and that kind of sound is I find really soothing. And so he kind of is my sleeping buddy, and he got like a little sleeping bag for him, so we don't get dog hair. And he gets in there and nestles in there and crams up against me. So that helps too. Pets are therapeutic, man. They're a pain in the ass, don't get me wrong, but they're very very therapeutic. All let's say the expression, all dogs are therapy dogs, right? I think that there's some truth to that.
Yeah, I used to have a dog growing up for about 10 to 13 years. Big one and strong one. So it was like a villain that you have to walk on the street, and he's about to kill everything that he sees. So he
Okay.
was a pretty aggressive dog.
Yeah.
As you was talking, Dave, I was having 2 or 3 questions pop in my head. So one is, do you follow any kind of diet these days, or you trying to follow some sort of nutrient path?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do you know, I mean, we clean, organic foods. We minimize meat, that's pretty much it. I mean, like we're not super um we cook a lot, like so we really control what goes in. We don't use really any processed foods. And it's usually, we'll make a steak once in a blue moon as a kind of treat or special event, but very little red meat, and mainly yeah, I mean we're kind of sensible, I would say, more than rigorous, right, about what we do, what we eat. But yeah, um holidays are kind of an exception. We're coming off of, Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, and it's just always like a kind of a bacchanal. It's a little bit of a gluttony moment, right? But generally, yeah, we're lots of vegetables, low carb, low fat, high protein kind of diet. It's kind of where we're at. And yeah, how about you? Are you a
I'm
Soylent
doing
guy?
I'm doing low carb these days. I'd say last year or two.
Okay.
Low carb. My breakfast is pretty light. I'll do tea or coffee with nuts. Um, so that would be my whatever breakfast slash whatever, not get hangry. And then around 11, I'll get like first actual meal. So usually my meals are roughly similar in nature, which is some sort of protein and salad. Usually close to zero carbs. So if I do eat carbs, it would be like either, I don't know, like one cookie or minimal amount of beans or some sort of garnish on the side on the plate. But usually it's vegetables, some fruits, and protein, fish, chicken, steak, what have you.
Gotcha. Yeah, well,
But yeah,
we're like we really like. I mean, we like wine and food, so we're never gonna. I don't think we're gonna go that stoic ever. With our diet, we definitely like to you know cook and pair food and wine and stuff like that. So I just can't see us ever going that way. It's if anything, the exercise variable has to turn up. You know what I mean? Like we're yeah.
I think it's easy for me because I never really get used to wine. Like it was never really my drink. Growing up, my drink of choice always been beer. Like Kiev in Ukraine, there is a big beer production factory, Obolon, and then in Ukraine, in generally speaking, there are like hundreds of different brands of beers. And generally speaking, above American average quality. So I'd say if Bavaria and Hungary would be, sorry, Holland would be 5 stars. I think Ukraine would be like 4 minus. Like it's not that far from good beers. So we had abundance of beer available. It's decent quality, and that was kind of me growing up. So I never really got into like. I mean, you're a student. You don't really drink wine when you're a student. You just either go hardcore, which I never really did, or you go beer because it's so accessible.
Yeah. When do you start drinking in Ukraine? Like, what's the typical?
Whenever you can reach to a bottle.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. It's kind of like that in the U.S., but you got to do it on the sly a little bit. High
No, I
school.
remember growing up, my parents were having beer at home, and they're like, "Hey, you want to try?" I'm like, "Sure." I try like, how you drink this shit? And
Yeah.
that kind of killed it for like a couple of years. But then I think I was in like 10th grade or something. I'm like, I think I'm adult enough. Let me give it another try. And I did it. I bought myself a bottle of drink. I'm like, kind of makes more sense now.
Yeah. It's
This
like
kind of
coffee, right? And it's
fogginess
acquired.
of your brain is kind of alluring a little bit.
Yep. Yep.
Second question I had. So recent year or so, I start to, for one reason or another, realize that mental health is actually a big problem, and uh, different kind of disorders exist in the society. Like I was suspecting me having some sort of depression for my whole basically adulthood. Like I remember moments in my upbringing where I would be like just sad or like even tears, right? But that was like very, I mean, tears would happen maybe like a couple of times, not like periodically, but being sad was pretty consistent. So I would just use willpower to kick myself out and get busy and, I don't know, hang out with friends, whatever. But, and also being introverted doesn't help with that either. So I was very introverted back in the day up until like later grades in school where like, oh, okay, well, I can be successful, I can be popular, I can speak, I don't have to really be quiet. So once you kind of discover yourself or your niche, then it becomes easier. So I discovered that, especially in America, a lot of people use antidepressants. They have bipolar, ADHD, what have you, a lot of names. So I personally was suspecting depression, and I actually got diagnosed with one. But he said it's minor form because I'm still pretty functional. I'm not like desperate or dying crying. Anything that you discover for yourself, do you have anything of that nature for you or had maybe before? And kind of what's your, I guess, not take, but more like what's your attitude towards it with regards to when you find people in your circle that have some sort of disorder? Have you found a way to work with it, deal with it, adjust to it?
Yeah. I definitely mainly probably the dominant one is kind of anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. That's the one that kind of I have moments of that, like social anxiety and stuff like that. I don't think I've had bouts of depression. I don't think it's a chronic problem for me. I think, for whatever reason. Usually it's things in my lifestyle that if I just, examine or whatever, I have some control over. So I'm, lucky in that regard. But I would say when I did have those kind of moments, key to that was get some kind of talk therapy, to build some tools, and to help address that, or to introspect and really understand what circumstances maybe are within my control that would lead to better mental health outcomes. So, I mean, I'm fully in support of anyone that, of that kind of stuff. I mean, it worked for me really well at several times in my life, to kind of have that, third party support and go, once a week for an hour to a neutral place. And I kind of really like the I really like the Gestalt therapy, kind of the where it's like there's this thing called focusing, Eugene Gedlin, which is like really, about kind of visualizing, the components of your life and then really trying to understand your body reaction to those components. And sometimes when you get like a gut, literally a gut like kind of reaction, you listen to that. And it's just it's a meditative form of therapy, kind of in the cognitive behavioral tradition. I mean, I studied psychology in college, which I dropped out of, but I took a lot of psychology classes. That was going to be my major, but programming, paid the bills better. But yeah, I mean, I don't. I think like in my family, it's probably mainly around like substance and alcohol abuse is kind of like the main mental health issue, I would say, probably with that. So recognizing that was important. And I've had moments where I've had to readjust my relationship to booze and stuff like that. Like I said, and I've lived with a bunch of people that have had, depression or mild depression, I think kind of what you're describing yourself, or periodic mild depression, or the other one is anxiety disorder, and kind of learning to be sensitive to those people, which I mean, let's face it, it's girlfriends. For some reason I attract that. I don't know what it is, but it's like kind of been a pretty consistent thing with the people that I've dated with. But yeah, I think it can be managed. I think pharmacological is one solution. I think talk therapy is another solution. So I from what I can see, it's really about more of a holistic thing of like looking at your life, getting into a relationship with a therapist that you can trust, and it has a really also a point of view that you can get behind. And for me, I'm being, probably being a dude that's solution oriented, tools focused, that Gestalt cognitive behavioral really appeals to me. It's like I can keep a journal, or I can try this breathing exercise, or I can try this focusing exercise. I like exercises, and kind of being a coach type, makes sense, right? But whatever works for you, I think is kind of key. Family support, I think, really makes sense. But I think probably where it comes down to is having the courage to, get past the stigma of it and say, I have this thing, can you help me? Right? Or I have this thing, can you be part of my support system? Is kind of key. So, I do think it's in the zeitgeist right now. And I think that actually there's a lot of people speaking out on this topic. I don't particularly feel like all that qualified to, like, I don't have like a ton of stories. I've been fairly lucky, I would say, or lucky, fortunate. I don't know. I just kind of, I've had moments, like I said, but I haven't really had to cope with it, inside or in family, or, too much with that exes or current relationships. So, but I do see it, people speaking out on it and it becoming more of a topic and less of a less of a stigma, right? Which it should be, because I mean, it's like the mind is part of the body. I mean, it absolutely is part of your, in a same way too, like things like faith or sense of belonging is is kind of a human thing, right? Whether whatever, however that manifests. I don't know if I'm making sense now. I'm going to stop talking, but you get my drift, right? It's like I'm happy that it's out there and happy to support anyone in my circle that needs to the extent I'm able to. And yeah.
I was doing periodically diaries, and I discovered that maybe 2017 for myself that it helps a lot to rationalize reality and thoughts and conquer thoughts, especially if you have like relationship problem or what have you problem. And and I use this 5 why method, right, that we use in consulting, where basically try to dig as deep as you can to find the root cause, not the top of the iceberg, but the bottom of the iceberg. Where's it all coming from? So yeah, having diaries in the morning, the evening, you just write first what is your thought that you revolves around, and the second why you think you have it and why you think it matters to you. And then you kind of start seeing the whole chain reaction of your feelings slash thoughts and how they impact one another. And then recently I was reading about cognitive behavior therapy that seems like they have this triangle of feeling, thoughts, actions. I'm like, okay, yeah, I think I was doing it kind of subconsciously by stumble upon it when I was doing diaries. So yeah, I think for those who have some sort of stress slash thoughts problem, I think diaries helps a lot.
Yeah, I do think having a good therapist can accelerate, can well not only accelerate but patch holes in your thinking. And I'm not going to share that here, but I've had moments where I've had a therapist ask the right questions that kind of led me to an insight of why a certain behavior was happening that I'm not sure I would have gotten to on my own. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Either I was like, and maybe, I mean, and when, you could tell it's an insight where you're like, oh my God, I should have thought of that, but you didn't. You know what I mean? Like either you're protecting or whatever, but that it is, I think for people that have mental health, getting a good therapist is a really kind of key thing in that. And then, I mean, if you've got something like serious, meds do matter, can really help, it's like,
Yeah.
so I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
And I come from country or countries that we don't really believe in mental health problems. We believe that you can be either low willpower, high willpower, alcoholic or not. That's about it. And like, like black people were saying like, hey, we don't have therapists, we have barbers or something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
similar of that nature. And only in States you like realize like, no, this is legit shit. It's this chemical reaction that is doesn't fire in your brain, like either lack of serotonin or dopamine or some receptors. So it doesn't have nothing to do with your willpower. It has to do with your chemical reaction that happens in your brain. And once you understand it, you start to look at this issue a bit differently. Same goes for like, I was and still am mad at my dad, for example, being lazy. I'm like, and then I don't think he chose to be lazy. I think he's lazy because that's how his brains work.
Okay. Why is he lazy? Like what makes him lazy? Like
What
what
makes
is
me
lazy?
to describe him as lazy?
Yeah, what define lazy? What is Dimitri's
Lazy
definition?
means for me, if it takes 5 minutes, it takes 5 minutes. For him, it might take 2 weeks.
Okay. All right.
So, and he just kind of push forward, can down the road as much as possible until he was not even sure where to start, and like analyzes, and now it's paralysis, and then like I don't even feel like doing it because it became such a monumental task. Well, yeah, if you would start doing phases by phases, you would already be done, or at least you've learned something how to get somewhere.
You ever hear the expression sphincter lock?
Thinker luck?
Sphincter.
No.
SPHINCTER. Sphincter lock. It's like you tighten up so much that you can't really do anything. It's like analysis paralysis. It's just
Yeah.
some more.
But I mean, actually, so I might have mentioned too, I have kind of pet project I've been doing in the background throughout the years, the life sciences, where I would write kind of my realizations about life. And one was, I actually realized that while working in consulting, I realized that I can borrow a lot of concepts from consulting and apply to life or personal life. Like, for example, we have agile ceremonies. Why we don't have it with our love partners, right? Why we have to go through like divorces? What if we would talk earlier about issues, right? So we focus so much, and rightfully so, to make money on how to make our work life effective and efficient, while our personal life have not nearly as much focus.
Oh yeah. I mean, uh, you know, they're definitely less so now. I've kind of have my shit together right now, but I would say, in my early days of being a lead or a leader, or I mean, I'm very organized at work, and my life could be a total hot mess. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of it's like yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think it's a maturity thing. Some people never get it together. For me, it came with, I'm a late bloomer, I think. So, but yeah, I mean, I think I mean, like in a way, like that kind of love language thing is kind of a very consulting-y thing too, and it's kind of, but it definitely helps to know where people are coming from and how they express themselves so that you can understand where to be grateful. Sometimes if it's not the way you express yourself, and it can be a little bit of a mismatch. I think you probably you get better it's very iterative too, just like the kind of agile metaphor. It's like, you are part of your identity is the sum total of your breakups. you know um you learn what to do. And if I go back to all the way back to the beginning, it's pretty cringy if you kind of think about it, like where you were, and where you ended up. But um yeah, you learn, you grow, and you become a little less of an asshole. Yeah. So
Option number one, trends in software development. Option number two, the concept of flow.
let's go with option number one, trends in
Okay,
software. Hold on.
trends
Okay.
in software. And what I have here, and something maybe you can use as starting point, new techniques, AI replacing engineers, integration of crypto technology into businesses that you see in the industry.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think true. Let's start at the top. Make a couple notes here real quick. So, new techniques, AI, crypto. Um, I could clear crypto off the deck really right away. I am pretty much a crypto ignoramus. I don't um particularly care for the culture around it. It's pretty disgusting to me. Elon Musk bros, crypto bros, fuck that shit. Not into it. I mean, objectively, it's interesting as a tech. The community kind of I find repulsive. um, and I don't see I mean, I get blockchain, I get a distribution, I get, a ledger, I get decentralization, all that stuff. I just don't, I haven't seen the light in terms of, it feels like a solution in search of a problem to me, in terms of taking those things and applying them to business problems a little bit. Um, by and large, I'm working with, you know, companies that have cloud native architectures. And so I'm kind of really pretty focused on that area, and, learning what I can to become, stay relevant there. But, I'm not particularly, I just don't, yeah, I don't fuck with crypto. It's kind of my thing. I keep my investments are really simple. Someday you need to give me an education and kind of help me do this, because
So you
I
don't
like,
see, to summarize, you don't see clients of yours or in the industry in general dipping toes into these technologies?
No, not really. I mean, like we have a school for dojo coaches called Dojo Academy, very creative name, right? But we issue blockchain backed certificates. I don't know what that buys me. I don't know why that's any better than them just um being, records in the database. I just don't know. Right? It's just not nothing I've really has piqued my interest, and it hasn't really, it just seems very hypey. I mean, I get cryptocurrencies and all that stuff, but I'm not like, some kind of, hacker person that's trying to, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like a damn um Ponzi scheme in a lot of cases.
Hmm.
And you know, um I get it. Like there was an interesting book I read years back called Cryptonomicon. This is like before crypto ever really took off. And it's this guy, Neil Stevenson. Like some people were theorizing he was like involved in the Bitcoin, inception of Bitcoin and stuff like that. And but it's like kind of this interesting story about, oh no, this Cryptonomicon. Yes, that's interesting, but also this, he wrote this other series of books that was the Baroque cycle. And it was really about how, you know, money was changing from being based on land assets to being based on exchange and like currency. Literally, it's like currents of the sea and
Trade.
ships. Yeah, trade. And so I get it, and it may be another recoining of the realm. I just can't see it. I can't. I don't know if that makes me old or whatever. Maybe it does, but it just doesn't fucking make any sense to me.
Let's make a maybe mental note for us, or mental record to have a separate session where we kind of challenge each other's concepts, beliefs. So maybe it's going to be beneficial for both of us.
Okay, that's cool. So we'll put crypto in the someday column. Um, as far as new techniques in software development, you know, I think there's always the question of new to who, right? And I think there's a lot of techniques that I trade on that are stuff that was kind of invented in the 60s, 70s, 90s, something like that, that I really don't focus on the newness. I focus more on the kind of the practice and the benefit it brings, and how do you adapt that to the circumstances given individual or team has. So, you know, something like test-driven development has been around for decades, not just from Kent Beck. He rediscovered it, but that was like a technique, compiler developers would use to stay sane and create specifications so they didn't have these crazy regressions, right? And so you can apply it to creating executable specifications as you go, and has this side effect of doing things like emergent design. I do think, like, overall, I am distancing myself from the agile ballywick. I think it's kind of old, and it's kind of had its shot, and it didn't really do particularly well. And in a lot of papers that say they're doing the agile aren't really getting the properties that agile would expose, which is like change should be a competitive advantage, and setting your processes up to, I don't know, embrace change should help you and stay relevant and pivot.
And to start with, I think people don't, recognize that this start of the agile movement was the word agility rather than agile. Agile became a thing where realistically was agility, which is adaptability to change, as you say.
Yeah, yeah. And where a lot of places you go, they're trying to use agile to be more predictable and have a fixed plan, which is, you might as well just do waterfall at that stage, right? It's like, if you're not going to change your plan and you're just going to sprint for 18 months and then ship it, or sprint for 3 months and then ship it, it's just incremental development, right? With a kind of a waterfall ahead of it and a waterfall
Maybe
after.
some feedback loops, yeah.
Yeah, but those feedback loops are about, yay, hooray, we did this, clap, clap, clap. What's the next chunk and next chunk? And it's a burn up chart, and it's project management, which is, there's some need for. I'm not, I think I do projects all the time in my business, and I make deadlines and commitments, and But what I do is I generally design a schedule. So I make a commitment at a high level, and then, we'll kind of figure out what it is as we learn more as we go. So, what we're really doing with Nerd Noir is we're trying to embrace a kind of new way of working with this kind of dojo approach, which is much more compositional, right? And so let me unpack what that means. So in object-oriented software, which I, basically don't really put a lot of stock in these days at all. I'm more functionally minded, I think, than anything.
I honestly not a big fan of object oriented. Like my mind just doesn't work like that. My mind works like processes, like what needs to happen, script. What needs to happen,
Yeah.
script.
Yeah. I mean and that's fine. I think, I definitely went down that path for a long time with, domain driven design and, TDD and refactoring and all that. Really, if you look at the early people that had something to say about agile and engineering and the intersection of those two, they all come from Smalltalk, OO, Oopsla. They all, and so a lot of those practices are really anchored there. Not to say they can't be applicable in other paradigms like functional and stuff like that, but they're really anchored in that. And so, you can't separate in a way, the material is going to inform the practice, right? And that's true for virtual stuff, just as it is like woodworking, right? It's just like those biases come into your practice. So when I say composition, what I mean is, I think traditionally with me being by and large a methodology person, you know, there's this thing in OO called, favor composition over inheritance. And it comes from this thing with OO, there's this thing called polymorphism and inheritance, right? Polymorphism, inheritance, capsulation, pi being kind of one of the central axioms of OO programming, or at least class-based OO, like so C#, Java, C++, that kind of thing, right? Which is kind of not where it really started, but that's a whole other thing. So the whole point of composition over inheritance is this idea that we want to let you know I'm on a YouTube video. Stop. Okay. So you want to, phone call. You want to compose your objects out of reusable services rather than create these inheritance hierarchies where is a relationship. And the reason for that is that when you do that, you have a lot more flexibility of change. That is, you're not creating this brittleness and this coupling, top down. You're really creating this kind of ability to recompose things as you need to, right? And that is how I approach organizations, right? And so, like, if we take a bureaucratic organization, right, that's going to be a very top-down kind of is a relationship, and that how things are driven is going to be very top-down. And if you look at certain agile frameworks, that's how it is. It's very consistent. Consistency is the thing that matters, and compliance. And are you doing these practices and these things? And is every team doing them, right? And it's this kind of top-down view of the world, which is, also predicated.
Very rigid and static design, right?
It's very rigid, and it's really modernism. It's a human paradigm of thought called modernism. That this idea, like, the architect's will be done, and everything was nice and neat from the top, but it doesn't really take into account what's happening at the bottom of the organization. And so, where I aspire to be a revolutionary in software is to actually say, no, let's invert that. Let's flip that around. We talked about that last time, so I won't go deep on that. But what that means is our workflow, right? And the way we organize. And you kind of see this with companies that are burnt out in Agile, and individuals and developers are like, I hate Agile, Scrum sucks. The pendulum swings to the other way, where it's like, we try to do this really rigid process, and that sucked, and we couldn't really get it together because the discipline, and we didn't really ever fit our circumstances or whatever. And so they just say nothing. Let's do nothing. Let's do pull requests, right? And GitHub issues. And that's it. right? And that, that's, I think there's a middle ground, right? Where you actually do have to um, build some protocols, and build some moments.
Expectations.
Yeah, expectations and even some rigor around what you do. But like one thing that I think top down kind of process is don't encourage change or adaptation. And like, one thing I would say, well, like working with version one, we would change all the time. The teams would change all the time. We had the tools, we could compose our process dynamically to meet the challenge, kind of a mission specific workflow, right? And the kind of people I'm interested in working with, I'm not really interested in working with organizations where competency is an issue, like where, they don't know how to write code. They don't. I'm interested in working with organizations that know how to write code, but they're not leveraging the team dynamic. They're not leveraging tools to build the process dynamically or change that process as their situation changes. That's who I'm trying to work with. And I recognize that's not everyone, right? I recognize that's a little chunk. So I think, and this is a bit of a selection bias happening here, but I think one new technique is really this, call it dojo, call it immersive learning, but essentially this idea of with a toolkit and some basic enabling constraints, we can organize to achieve a greater result than we would get individually. Say a collection of 5 individuals, if they kind of employ this stuff, will get a better outcomes, working together, right? And so collaboration, balancing that with quality of life, work-life balance, outcome thinking, some of those principles, everything's visualized, some of those principles guiding you, and then you saying, well, what makes sense for me right now? What makes sense for us right now? So that's kind of where I am with a new technique, and it's like, so I don't really care about test-driven development, really. I mean, I like it and I benefited from it, but I'm not passionate about individual practices. I'm passionate about what practices make sense for you right now. And also, can we get you to the point where you understand that your context may change and your practices may change as a result?
May I add to what you just said? I think early on I recognized that when I was going through my consulting / engineering careers, that like I don't give a shit about tools that much. Like to me, tools are just tools. Like some people obsess about Jenkins or cloud or something. I'm like, those are just tools. Like they meaningless. What matters to me is the end result, how we use them. Is what we built of good quality and is usable, interesting, and serve the purpose? Or there are people clear like, oh my God, did you see the latest script we can put in Jenkins? I'm like, I don't give a shit.
Yeah. So I'll always kind of advocating for whether it's new or old. The way the people I want to work with and what I hope to influence is this notion of principles, right? And this idea that, we as a group, if you and I and 3 of our homies are going to get together and build a software, first thing we should do is agree like what principles are going to guide our decision making, such that you don't have this divergence of opinion and thought. And like, I just got done working with a team where one guy was an ultimate chronic future proofer, and the other person was a Rubyist that was really more kind of in that camp of, well, yeah, we'll solve that when we get to it, but let's, kind of generate that. So it's like, in a way, if they could even agree on a design philosophy, then they would have much more harmony and they would start to kind of, form together as a team. So I'm really passionate about that kind of social side of the socio-technical space. A ton of respect for, I mean, this assumes that we have technical competency, right? And so, you know what I mean, like that. But I've decided I don't particularly want to. That's not my problem to solve. I think other people, can solve that problem. I'm not going to make a coding school anytime soon or a boot camp anytime soon, right? It's all about teaming for me. So
There's
I think
not a whole lot of margins left there, right?
no,
It's
there's
a lot of competition there already.
Yeah. So the way I've kind of organized my workflow in the kind of the dojo challenge is it's a spine. It's a very narrow, like lightweight framework that you can plug things into as you need to. And they'll give you an example. So we do usually in the kind of first week, we have a lot of focus on discovery, right? And that discovery is going to from team to team, what you need to discover will change. Sometimes it'll be process discovery. So we'll do value stream maps, and value stream architecture comes as a result of that. Sometimes it'll be product discovery. So we may do like user journeys, and when we may use that to drive user research and interviews, and even doing validation outside of delivery. Sometimes it'll be technical discovery, which could be C4 model and the maps and stuff like that. Could be event sourcing or event modeling if we're going to build a distributed system and we really want a front load design to get things right. But the idea is like whatever you're doing, you're going to pick the right map. And so for everything, I'm looking to say, what's the bare minimum? And then what are your options in those beats, right? And you've got 4 or 6 weeks, pick a time frame that works for you, and let me help you enumerate those options and maybe even make some suggestions around, but you got to make the choice, right? So that way of thinking is radical. It is, and I moved beyond being like, oh, it's just another process too. No, that's a radical way of thinking, and I'm convinced of it. You can't. Don't waste your time trying to convince me otherwise. So as far as new technique, I think that is a very important technique. Now, the other thing that is particularly interesting is AI, right? And we can kind of segue into that topic a little bit too. I do think AI replacing developers, about half of developers need replacing. There's, a lot of people that just have no business developing software. They're just not qualified. There's a lot of incompetence in this space. So if you're competent, you're going to figure out to say AI is a tool. AI doesn't think, it doesn't feel. It's literally garbage in, garbage out, just like any other algorithm. Prompt engineering. You can't, swing a dead cat on YouTube without finding out how to make $17,000 passive income with ChatGPT, right? That's hype. I think, though, having Copilot or something, give me some options, right? How do I remember the .NET Stream API on the top of my head? No, I don't. I don't encounter it every day. Do I know I need to use streams to write to memory or read from memory or read from file or whatever? Yes, I do. Or IO socket, fine. But I could express that and get some options that would save me a trip to Stack Overflow. And I have no problem with that, for the record, right? So I think AI is a powerful tool. I don't think it is a substitute for people thinking. I do think the notion of a rigid hierarchy of, architects up top that design things and create guardrails that goes down to, a group of people that make, color by number and paint by number decisions. That's old. That is of a hierarchical bureaucratic organization that if you do not change that, you will get disrupted by a generative network driven organization. It's just the way it is. Like, so, to me, AI, it's like R2D2. It's like a buddy. I mean, R2D2 arguably has way more soul than these AIs for sure. It's really about it. It's a tool that you can use to generate things. I think, though, that separating labor to where, people there's code monkeys and then there's thinkers, kind of architects. I think that's a crazy notion too. Flattening that down to people that design and think and sometimes use the AI to speed up their workflow. That's where I think we've got at least a decade of that. I'd be surprised, if we have. I mean, I was on the OpenAI, the ChatGPT site the other day, and I'm like, I want you to act as a business analyst. I want you to write, write me user stories for the login functionality around an e-commerce site. And it wrote them all. I mean, it just literally, if that's your job, you're fucked. I mean, if that's all you do is if you take the requirements from the users to the programmers, like Office Space, we saw the outcome that guy had. I mean, he got hit by a car and he got a settlement. And he was able to make his jump to conclusions map. Hopefully I didn't lose you there. Office Space. If you haven't seen it, it's seminal, right? Yeah, have
I
you
was
haven't
about
seen
to say
Office?
no, I actually seen this one.
Okay, good, good. So, but in that, this is just middleman thing. I mean, anything where an industry progresses, generally speaking, those middle people get eliminated, right? And so, I don't know.
It was a question asked to Andreessen. I was saying like, hey, aren't you like, what's your point of view about this evolution of different technologies and titles and roles in different businesses? Like, look, 100 years ago, it was a title. The guy who starts the fire in a fireplace in a hotel in a concierge lounge. That was a profession back in the day. So there's nothing new as far as elimination of certain jobs. We just requalify, become something else.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is this, there's a point at which, efficiency is so like things are so efficient that county the notion that employment is going to hold society up is a faulty notion, right? And so I'm not trying to come off as unempathetic to that. I do think though that there's I don't have a lot of patience for people that coast. And some, sometimes I see that in the job.
And that's where the stress coming from.
Yeah, a little bit. It's like,
For
what?
me, for sure. Like I have
Yeah,
really low empathy for low bar.
yeah, yeah. But what I've learned is I can, probably kind of wrap it up a little bit. I can sometimes it's a choice that, I can say, well, my choice led me to this situation where I'm working with bottom of the barrel kind of, where competency is really an issue. And like, so what we're trying to do now is do a better job of, vetting and saying, okay, you're a client we want to work with because you're in the, this is privilege and this is, but it's like, it's also discipline and it's also like, just the discipline of saying no, right? But we want to work with you because these are problems we're passionate about, right? Versus, I'm certain I'm just not passionate about, um, you know, working with terrible developers, right? I want to work with good developers that maybe could benefit from teaming better, right? I want to work with good developers that need actual clear change vision and strategy from their leadership. Like I want to work with organizations that earnestly want to become more generative outside of, maybe some constraints that are placed on them around, being a public company and governance. Like, but how can we work with those constraints versus have them kind of establish that top down kind of thing. That's what I'm most, I think where it's where I can add value. And so probably that's what, fuels me. Right. So I don't know. AI to me, I'm not worried about it. I'm like, I built an AI startup. I've used it enough to know it's it's a little VUCA, little FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the AI thing. I don't think it is. If you're worried about it, time to invest in your skill set. I think, I don't think that's the thing that's gonna cause you to, if your job is to take the code from Stack Overflow and put it into GitHub, worry about it. If your job is to really work with other people and including customers and to design things and to evolve that design and to make that design sustainable, AI can be your buddy. That's how I look at it.
Cool. So the second was flow. I remember I started talking about this concept with ED. We know ED, right? And that's actually the joke. It was Uber was picking us up, and on a screen of his phone was saying like ED. It was like, are you ED? No, it's you who is ED.
Ed, Yeah.
Ed. So he was talking about concept of flow, and I was just started to discover this concept for myself, and I was Googling and reading about it. So I'm pretty sure you have something to share about this concept and how you find yourself in this state, and what is it for you, and basically how you maintain it. Any kind of insights from your perspective?
Yeah. So there's flow is one of those overloaded terms, and there's two meanings I think that are appropriate. There's psychological flow, which is like essentially around getting in a state of ultra productivity, right? And there's a really, an interesting graph you should throw up here if you're into editing that, but it's like essentially like on the top and the y-axis, it's the I always get this wrong. It's the difficulty of the task. So if it's low diff, and then on the x-axis, it's the skill of the person doing the task. So low skill, low difficulty, you can be in flow. High skill, like low difficulty, you're going to be bored, right? High skill, high difficulty, low skill, you're going to be frustrated or anxious. So your job's on the line. So it's all about kind of matching that up and staying in if there's this zone of flow, right? As you kind of do that.
So I think we might have to correct your initial statement. It's not ultra productivity, it's a balance between skill and difficulty.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
So you're probably not extra productive, but you just found just right amount of balance between both.
Yeah, yeah. And there's spectrums, and it's a model, and all models, are wrong. Some might be useful, right? George Box. But that's flow. And I don't know. For me, on individual projects, I do like a lot of creation, and I think when I'm on my own, how I manage flow is I really gotta, it's just I don't know. I mean, it's certainly part of the time of day. Early morning works better for me to really get into it. A deadline really helps for me, push it, because I will just procrastinate and waste time unless I have a deadline. So setting a deadline and making an external commitment creates a condition where I have to do it. And when I have, and I'll quickly transition from having to do it to I'm doing it, and I'm being very prolific, right? So that's what works for me. But I think ultimately for you, you got to figure out what works for you, what environment, what circumstances, what conditions, what constraints are going to lead you to flow. Certainly knowing, having a target, of what outcome you're trying to produce, or what even output you're trying to make, certainly helps. I think it's another matter entirely to take a group of people, like a team, and say, how do we get a group of people into a flow state? And I think, part of that could be done with good facilitation, right? And setting an objective for coming together, and like a really, good meetings, right? Strong meetings, essentially saying, hey, we're going to do this. And then you have someone kind of guiding the group toward that effort. And I've seen that in training courses. I've been, as I started as a trainer, I wasn't very good at that, but I got better as time went on, and got people more engaged and working. It's much easier to do in person than it is over Zoom or MS Teams, right? So that's part of it. Of course, like ensemble and mob programming purports to say one group of people with very skilled set that kind of complete each other. So there's a complete set of skills on one workstation, looking at one screen, focused on the same problem. Right. So that mobbing thing and having this kind of quick rotations of like driver and navigator can produce flow. And that's probably one of the best techniques, like new techniques I've seen for encouraging that kind of flow. And it works remotely too, is the thing. It's like you got to make some tweaks to it, maybe a little bit longer rotation, but smaller groups help as well. A mob of 8 tends to be a little bit where people can kind of drift off. Mob of 4 is kind of a sweet spot, or 3 even the sweet spot. So that's psychological flow, and I know for me what it takes to get there, and I share that. Essentially a deadline, nice environment, a little bit of caffeine, clear thing I'm trying to get out the door. Then there's the concept of flow from a system, right, of development, right? And this is a different thing, right? This is essentially the idea that single piece flow, right? The idea of, like, agile, and then before that, waterfall was all about batches. So waterfall is a big batch, agile is small batch, right? The holy grail is this kind of notion of, we're going to take one order, right, from our customer or our product manager or whatever, saying we want to get this thing done. And we start that, and we do everything we need to do, or we have all the capabilities we need to do to complete that order all the way back to the customer, right? And so this is kind of coming from lean, and it's really hard to do when you have a highly fractured value stream. Like when you have one set of people that are responsible for creating the requirements and they throw it over the wall, and one set of people that are doing the analysis and design and they throw it over the wall, and then the developers in India do all the coding and test automation and they throw it over the wall, and then release management kind of takes it and does whatever they do, and then they promote it up through environments into production, right? It's very hard to take a single piece. Organizations that are doing that are not optimized for single piece flow. They're optimized for batches. And so what I described there is a waterfall process, even if you're iterating in that development. So I think the key to flow for me with software development teams is to make them fully capable and accountable for what they're doing, right? Such that they can take an idea, or they can take an order from a customer. They can okay, we're pretty sure this is a good thing to work on. And if it isn't, we can also reverse our mind and make a reversible, decision on that. But we've decided, however, to work on this thing. Now, in one roof, maybe even a mob, we can do everything we need to do to polish that to a production ready state, including push it to production. So now what we've done is collapse all those departments into one team. And so then we scale by adding teams, right? That is another definition of flow that I'm also keenly interested in, is like, how do we do that? And so a lot of places you go to, they're like, well, we want to do flow metrics and stuff. Like, yeah, we're going to do all this. I'm like, great. Look at how you're organized, though. Your value stream is this department, this department, this department, this department, handoff, 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 handoff. You're never going to get that, right? You can measure the flow from this point to this point, but that's not what flow is, right? That's a cycle time, right? You can measure the whole lead time over the thing, but until you start building that internal capability and that atomicity, inside of a team where they can do everything: architecture, design, programming, testing, non-functional requirements, cross-functional requirements, reacting to production outages, SRE, all that kind of stuff. Now you're talking about having to raise a competency level of individuals really, really high, and then you can start looking at the team, inside the team, and saying, is there a little waterfall happening in that team? Is dev passing to tests, or is dev passing to someone that has to do a PR, pull request, review and merge, right? And that then goes to a lower environment where, you have tests. And that's just a little waterfall. So it's waterfalls all the way down. So we're trying to find that and say, okay, now can we have an individual or pair or mob, all the skills that we need to do to say, yep, push it to prod. And if shit goes south, roll back, or maybe you do canary and see if it, we testing a prod, right? All the practices that kind of go alongside DevOps stuff, it's kind of centered on that a little bit. But that to me is another form of flow that's really important and interesting and worthwhile to get to, and where I want to work.
When I was researching this topic back in the day, I found a couple kind of features or requirements in order to find flow. One is a lot of times we tend to like sports and team kind of activities, and we find flow in doing those activities because we have this kind of team focus on some sort of goal. So when you describe mob programming, especially in an intimate number of people in a group, that creates that flow because they feel like it's a game. It feels like they are not really do something boring task, but more like playing a game, and they swap and they have roles and collaborate and such.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point. And you could tell when the mob, sometimes, we'll be working with a team and we'll get into this mob programming practice, and, one one navigator will say, okay, we're going to go down this path, and then time's up and we switch, and then new navigator takes us in a different direction, right? And okay, another navigator takes us in a slightly different direction, goes back to the original, and you could see if they're not converging, but it will force that convergence. Like it's very visible without even pointing it out that you're not making progress because you're going in different directions and taking the group here. Now we're taking the group here, and it's, and so then you can have a kind of intervention and say, hey, where are we really going? What's the destination? Can we agree on that so we have some continuity across the navigational shifts, right?
One more thing comes to mind about flow is when people talk about finding calling, right? Something that you might have aptitudes or talents or skills just out of nature, and you good at something. So usually, like people would ask, like, "Hey, how do I find myself?" Well, notice if something gives you that flow, and you can spend hours and hours doing it without losing energy. Like, so for example, I was doing some pet projects coding. I would find myself like 11 p.m. I'm still can keep going. Like, okay, so I can do programming.
Yeah,
Or like play some games, or so whatever you do, and you find yourself that you're not losing energy while doing it, that could be your calling or something that you should probably pay attention. So you in the flow as a metric to find out your calling. So it's kind of these two concept overlap.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. Or a good test, right? I like doing this. Maybe you should do more of it or do it professionally. Or, when you start doing something for a paycheck, though, it has a tendency to erode at that a little bit. But maybe that's another conversation for another time.
Yeah.